Hello from wherever you are, and welcome to Let's Play Games. I'm John McFarland, Adult Services Librarian for National Public Libraries, and I hope you'll join me in learning or rediscovering some of the more common and uncommon games out there. So, we're taking apart the game of chess and trying to simplify it. Last time we talked about the pieces on the board. This time we're going to talk about opening moves and how to set up your pieces. Also, some pieces are much more valuable than others. Let's get stuck in. Last time we covered a gamut of a full game where we got into the weeds like we often end up doing. But this time I want to take a step back and talk about the beginning of the game. We talked about the idea of an opener, a specific subset of moves in order to set up a plan of attack. A lot of the big grandmasters, the world chess champions, will have moves that they specialize in as their plan. And usually their opponents are trying to plan for that exact outcome. Mm-hmm. So we're going to refer to this episode with what are called king side openers. I probably heard Phil talking about the king's pawn in this instance. So that would be this e-file pawn here. That is, when you say probably the most popular opening is e4 right there?
It probably is. The queen's pawn is close second, but I think good old pk4 or e4 is probably the most popular, most common initial move.
So, and you probably noticed that I do have the notation here because I don't have it memorized. Sometimes these get hard to memorize because they can be 10, 11, 12 moves long depending on what's happening.
Yeah.
And in the last game, the King's Indian opening, which is what I was trying to do, A is usually dependent on certain moves being made by white, and you ended up occupying multiple spaces that I was wanting to occupy with that movement. So this is where you have to be a little experimental. So what I'm going to do first is called the Sicilian. So Phil's going to help me play into this. And that'll be this E4 right here, which opens up two little diagonal points either from the queen or from this bishop.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, it's a defense played by black, the Sicilian defense. Instead of a closed response like this, black opts for this. What's that all about? That always threw me as a young player, and it kind of occupies a good place on the board, and it discourages the queen's pawn from coming out immediately to the d4 square, although it could happen, and the queen could then come in right behind it.
And that's where I'm looking. That queen can easily come out here, and potentially, if I move this queenside pawn, put me in check immediately. Mm-hmm. There is a way to lose in 2 moves, technically speaking. More commonly, 4 moves is what people refer to. I'm going to try to avoid that today. Mm-hmm. So this next one's going to be this knight, jump over, nf3.
Okay. Let me think on this. Knight to f.
Usually d6 is next. Knight to f3.
Yeah. d6 is a safe move here.
So that protects that c5. So this is where the game starts developing. Now, in theory, I could, if I wanted to be super aggressive, take this bishop and go here and place king in check. But really, in grand scheme of things, it's a wasted move because it's not going to place you in checkmate. There's options you have to get out of that. So for me, I'd rather do something that's not going to cause me to have to spend a move to try and protect that bishop. Mm-hmm. So let's see, D. 4. So I'm going to invite that attack now.
Yeah. And I will take that up. C takes D4. Well, we are, yeah. Let me look at something here. Are we set up correctly here? Right square. Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes that's always something good to check to make sure you have it set up right.
Looked unfamiliar for me, but yes.
Queen's on color.
Yeah, everything is good. King's right. Right square is light. Just looking at the letters here, it threw me for a little bit. Okay. So the C pawn will go ahead and take this.
Okay, and then the next thing is...
Okay.
So that way you've got that simple pawn exchange. I keep my space. Allows them to develop.
And that's a real common fourth move, I believe.
Yes. The next one's...
Yeah. And that is a nice opening setup for white, I think, with those two knights out there occupying space. At this point, I probably would do this. Not quite sure if that's...
The Najdorf variation is exactly what I have on here.
There
So
we go.
this is what I mean by openings being played out fairly effectively. The last one is that BE3. So we went actually through, the next one's going to be E6, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, there are a lot of named openings or a lot of named variations to openings. All through chess history, there are various grandmasters who kind of got behind these certain moves and they named them after them. The Sicilian dragon, there's just numerous
If it's a move, it's got a name, I promise you.
In fact, there's a book here that I brought for fun that just goes over numerous types of traps and openings. The Vienna game, the Bishop's opening, Scotch game, center game. So there's whole books just on openings and move progressions and things like that. But it's reasonable just to play well, kind of focus on what's really happening. Don't try to memorize every possible variation of every opening. You'll drive yourself crazy.
And especially because it's going to fall apart by move 10, by move 11, by move 15. So
exactly.
To give the notation a specific, so that way you all can see it done. So as we'd be playing, you'd probably be potentially doing the same, where we mark down what's going on.
Moves, yes. And some openings can be very tense, very closed. You're protecting every single piece immediately. You don't want to lose a pawn. You're just playing to not give anything up. And sometimes other players are more freewheeling. They'll give up a piece right away to get a positional advantage. So that's how chess is.
And one of the important things to do is the pawns don't have any label for them. The knights, the reason why we don't use K is because we already have a K, the king piece. So that is the N. So we'll put N, F3. We'll get to a game later where it actually requires a second letter. But in order to show that you're capturing a piece like we did here, you'll put the file that it's from, so it was C, an X, which will give you the capture, and then the piece that was captured, that D4.
Right.
So then the N, and the reason why I'm not labeling which N it is because the N capturing D4 is that NF3 and is the only one that can make that move. So this will be part of learning notation. So NXD4, then your move NF6, NC3 for me, A6, and then my bishop, which is a B, E3, and an E6. Now I want to take you back a couple moves. So let's go ahead and reset the board so that way I can show This is typically for a lot of games, especially when you're learning. So go ahead and run through until I expose the queen side. So e4, c5, and f3.
3d6.
d6, d4. So pause here. Notice that in theory, what you could have done is go ahead and do qa5.
Queen to a5?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a...
So typically when you're discussing moves that you could have done differently, what you can always do on a sheet of paper is, so if this is the main line you're running down, you can kind of put over here. So I've got the 3, d4, or you can just do 3 dot dot dot. So that way you know that that move's already been done, and the next move would be q a5. And because you've placed in check the king, you're gonna put this little plus sign. So that way it's notated that the next move has to be something that takes out of check.
Now this would not be a move I would make, simply because, as John alluded to, it's kind of a wasted move. You're checking the king, but it's way too early, and there's so many ways to get out of it and develop another piece. So I would, probably block it with the bishop, and then your queen is now in danger. And it's not horrible, but I'm kind of backtracking a little here and obviously attacking a little bit. John obviously sees that. He'll develop a pawn.
You did QB6?
Yes.
Okay. And this is where typically in the post game, whenever I have moves to go over, this will be exactly what I do, and then I can either do B3,
Right.
B4, whichever I want to do, or I can even do this if I wanted to and put that at risk, even though that exposes, but still.
Yeah, exactly. And one person I work with, he's just starting chess and he plays on his phone, and he gets all flustered when somebody's queen comes out and starts attacking. And it's like, that's really not a good strategy for the queen to come out early, and it shouldn't bother you too much when you have so many pieces that you can block with, and meanwhile develop your pieces. But beginners tend to overlook things and panic a little bit, miss obvious plays they can make. So the queen, in my opinion, should stay back a little bit until more pieces around the board advanced a little bit. Develop your smaller pieces first.
And that is just one basic 6-move opening. So I would take the time to maybe practice that on a board yourself. And as you're practicing it, if you're playing with somebody or if you are doing single player mode, play against yourself, which is sometimes your hardest opponent, because if you know your plan, you know the other person's plan too. Take a step back for a second. I promised you more history of this game. I want to give it to you, and then we'll cover a little bit more complex of an opening. Hold on a second. So, continuing the development of Chaturanga into chess, I covered Shangqi, Chinese chess, last time. I want to talk a little bit further, actually, because the game continued developing even more. We got to Shogi, which is admittedly one of my favorite games to play. It is a 9x9 board, and the pieces are even further developed in the context of there was extra levels added to it. They could be promoted easier, they could be captured a tad easier, and Shogi, translated for General's Board Game in Japanese, could also be a capture-based game because the pieces that you captured you could use to your advantage by bringing them on the board to your side, adding an extra level of complexity to what is already a complex game. Welcome back. So I promised you a little bit more complex of an opening. We're gonna go ahead and bring ourselves a new page, and we're gonna do the Rui Lopez Opening, also referred to as the Spanish game. And this moveset's been around since 1597, I think it is.
Probably. It's
Plus or minus a couple of
the
years.
first opening I learned, and it's held up well. There's many variations.
So much like the Sicilian, it starts with e4 by whites. And this time, rather than the unorthodox opening, we're going to have this piece out here. And notice that it'll follow still kind of the same moveset, the knight to f3.
Yeah, and this seems very natural to just play these moves. You're protecting, he's attacking.
And that's another protection. So here's where we throw caution to the wind. That bishop is going to come forward.
Yeah, now I wonder, do you want to immediately lose the bishop in exchange for a knight? And why would you want to do that? So I double my pawns? Is that really what that's about?
And explain double pawns.
Double pawns would mean, let's say okay, it's my move.
Yeah, it's your move.
Maybe I did this to attack, and he didn't back up. He decides to take me, and then I do this. Whoa, I've double pawns on the same file here. That's not horrific, but it's not ideal to have your pawns doubled like that. If you lose a couple more, they're not supported too well. So that could be what he's after. Not sure.
And for me, if that bishop doesn't factor into the way that I want to checkmate Phil, I'm willing to make that sacrifice, especially if I'm worried about that knight.
Now, he's obviously thinking about 25 moves ahead, though.
I would never.
This bishop is key to his game plan, so he wants to hang on to it. So maybe
Yes.
I would do that. That's pretty standard.
Yes, and then I'm going to move this piece back, but I'm still going to keep that diagonal risk there. So I could take that knight whenever I want, and then there's only a pawn covering. So if stuff starts getting moved, that pawn cannot move without that king moving in some way, because you cannot place yourself in check. Make sure you understand that concept.
That is an important concept. Even if you're getting out of check, by getting out of check, you've placed yourself in check from another piece. That's a discover check. That's illegal, so keep that in mind. So I think I would probably do this variation and just try to get that bishop back again.
Right, and so
That's pretty standard.
it's pretty standard. The technical would be NF6, but I like that move as well because it forces me to waste another move and it develops that pawn.
Sure. But if I did...
If you do that, then the next thing I do
You want a castle, okay.
is this. So this is a good opportunity to actually talk about what castling is and why it's so important. So why am I wanting to, both of us did it pretty quickly in our previous episode's game. Why am I so effectively doing it now?
Well, first of all, you can only castle once during the game. And you can lose your chance to castle if you move either your king or your rook out of necessity. So it may be wise to castle a little bit early, maybe within 10 moves, just because you have that opportunity and you might not get it later. It does offer a little bit of a safe haven there for the king, at least temporarily. Castling is entirely optional. You can go a whole game without castling. It's just a unique move. There's only a couple unique moves there that are one-time only deals, and that's called castling on the king's side. And how is it notated, John?
I was actually just starting on that. So E4, E5, NF3, and C6. Make my 6 look a little better. B, B5. Sometimes these can be a little bit of a mouthful. A6, B, A4, because I backed it up, and then him moving that knight, which would be NF6. And if you had kept that pawn move, which is not a bad move, it would just be labeled as B5. And I probably would have to waste a turn trying to keep protecting that piece before I could castle.
and you're not worried about losing this pawn immediately to my knight. You decided, I'm going to castle.
Right, so the way this would now show up is an O or a 0, depending on how you want to look at it, and an O. So if I'm castling on the king side, that would be through. And if you had that piece on B5, right? Just have it there for a second if you don't mind. That does not prevent me from castling, correct? It's only if it was a bishop or a queen.
Right. You can't castle through any kind of attacking piece that might bring the king into the path of that attacking piece. That's you're castling through a check, actually, so that's not legal.
What about, let's see, just as an example, if the knight was here, it puts here at risk and here at risk, but it doesn't put here at risk or here, so it's fair game, right?
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, you just can't castle through an attacking piece.
Sometimes castling rules are a lot. I will also give you we talked about king side, there's also the queen side.
Okay.
So yeah, if you want to go ahead and show that example. So if you'd have to have the bishop, the knight, and the queen all have to move for this. So usually it takes a little bit longer, but then you can move it to.
Always remember the king moves first too, on either side, a king side castle or queen. So it's 2 moves by the king. The rook kind of slides around onto that side, queen side castle. So that's notated
with O dash O dash O.
All right.
Because it's a differentiation to give you a better explanation of what happened.
Right. That always puzzled me as a young player. Whoa, what is he doing there? It's a queen side castle. That's totally legal.
All right, so let's get back to, let's see, those.
Okay. You had castled.
I had just castled. So the next big thing, and for me this is what I still struggle with, is an open versus a close. So on the notation I've got here after castling, open is knight taking e4, but closed is bishop to e7. So explain to me the differences between those two moves.
Well, you're basically delaying taking that piece, I think, because he'll get it back. He will be able to recapture. If I took this, I believe you're going to want to do that. We can play this out.
So d4.
Oh, no. You just move your rook.
Oh, so e5.
Yeah, and then I've got to move this off. Well, this could lead to something interesting. Now I'm attacking.
Yep, so now that piece is in danger.
You're sort of...
This is where you get into variation upon variation upon variation.
Definitely, that's
so
what you wanted to do.
Move back 1 second to that nxe4. So go ahead and capture that piece.
Okay, so you're not worried about me doing this because you got a plan with...
Right, so the next thing would actually be moving past that. It's got d4. Yeah, this one's one I still struggle with being an open game.
Yeah, I don't quite get... Well, let's play it out.
Next one would be b5.
b5, so now I'm attacking that bishop.
Right, and I don't want to lose it yet.
No.
So I've got this... Remember I talked about inevitably I was going to have to move that piece back.
I see.
But I've still got a little bit of mobility in what I can do, because a lot of this game is having the open space to move.
Right, and look at all this open space. Now if I take this...
And that is actually the next move. So next will be, what do we got here? B6, which I can only do through here. So it's got, I think we have...
You might want to...
Let's see, d5. Well, you move d5, so then I'm capturing that one. So put that pot back. And this is sometimes the notation of he moved that piece up, I'm capturing that piece. There we go. We're fixed. it's time we talk about how the game arrived into Europe. It was courtesy of the Crusader era. When Western, Central, and Eastern Europe invaded Muslim lands in the 10th and 11th centuries, they spent a lot of time looking at their customs and adapting it for their own entertainment. So, when they came upon the game of Shatranj, they liked it and started adapting it for their own needs with some changes. The most obvious of which, elephants, which weren't really a thing in Europe, were changed into the bishop piece. Also, the way that the pieces moved was obviously changed slightly, but the queen, which was the replacement for the vizier or the counselor, that move wouldn't happen until a little bit later on. But this was the first time that we really started seeing an attachment to a game developed for its own needs in Europe. But more on the queen, how it became more powerful later. So then it's got BE6.
Bishop to E6?
Or, sorry, what is
What? We goofed this up.
Yeah, I probably did, which is honestly half the fun of this game is trying to figure out, wait, I was where?
Why?
It's probably D6 is where I'm thinking.
D6. Okay. So I don't remember a pawn ever getting over that quickly.
And then I've got C3. And then, and actually I think that moves up because the next one after that's BC5. So that's, yep, the D will be D5, and then the B C's BC5 and bring it up.
Okay.
And now I've got to try and explain one of the moves here. First off, the next move for you is castling move, but for me, this D2 square right here. I've got the option, and I mentioned before about the knight. There are two possible squares that could lead to there, either here or here. So for notation purposes, the next move here is BD2. So the way you're going to write it in is going to be N for the knight, B telling you which one's making the move, and then the square they're going to. And if it was capturing a piece, you would add in an X for wherever it's going. So from here, you've got a couple of different options. Go ahead and castle there so we can take a look at where we're at. Notice how this board got crowded quick. This is the important part of developing pieces. We're 10 moves in. Only 2 pieces have been captured. But both of us have options. That I referred to the first episode, that diagonal range. So everything on, what's that, CD8 through GH3, or sorry, GH4 is completely covered. Any piece on there could be instantly taken. That bishop has kind of an angle towards the king. This one hasn't been developed yet. This will probably be one of the next steps. I've also got, we talked about that E1 move will eventually probably occur, which in the closed version, it has me doing that actually. But it doesn't actually have me capturing it within the first 10 moves because it can be done at any point. So from this position, just looking at it from your angle, who would you say was in an advantage spot? Because it's kind of a close game from this.
It is. I don't think black is too badly developed here. I think there could be a capture immediately of this knight, and
but then the sacrifice with...
Well, we don't have to exchange queens, but that could happen. I never like to lose my queen too early. I like the bishop placement here, although this bishop is pretty aggressively attacking. We both castle, safely, but, now we have to worry about protecting, keeping this fortress and just one little pawn move, you can open up an attack. I don't particularly like this pawn. How about if we demonstrate the en passant move?
Yes, while we're at it, because that is the perfect position, and actually being on the 5th or 4th file you have to be on the opposing side.
Right.
So if that piece gets moved...
If I decide for some reason to do this...
I am allowed to capture that piece. I still have to capture diagonally, but I get to move up and take that piece.
That's mind-boggling to me.
It's a bad move, but why might you?
You might find this opportunity later in a game, and it makes more sense. And you should not feel compelled to do that, but just keep it in the back of your mind that I can take him that way en passant, because it was the first move by my pawn, and I moved 2 forward, and in doing so, I gave him the opportunity to capture me, because I ended up side by side with his passed pawn. He was able to get a pawn across.
If you're on the 6th file, though, like if we did that en passant move and you move 2 forward again with the G file, it would not be able to be captured. So it's one of those only when you're in that 4-5. So sometimes you can like hanging a piece there.
Yeah, it's essentially a little bonus for you for crossing the rank of the center of the board with one of your pawns, and now you're in their territory. You're given the opportunity to capture. It's a French word for in passing, but it's one of those odd moves that's available to you in chess. That and castling are the two you just should know about, but by no means are they mandatory for you to take that.
Yes. So
I mean,
this is where we have in levels of increasing complexity all of the different ways you can play this game. So this is why I always recommend taking it a step at a time, working on your fundamentals. Notice that piece, is now captured. I got a pawn, sure, but really didn't do that much. So you're trying to develop this game progressively and put yourself in an increasingly advantageous position and wait for, me to make a mistake. So
you're essentially trying to gain control of the board, capture pieces, and really put the king in danger. In the process, you're picking up pieces, but the big picture is you want to pressure that king, corner him, make sure he's blocked in, get some pieces across, and essentially get a checkmate. That's the ultimate. But can happen, you can resign before a checkmate occurs. There's just different ways to end a game. Yeah.
So we'll take another step back. I've got a little bit more history with you, and then we've got even more to show you. So I want to talk about the queen now. Couldn't hold it back any longer. So the Spaniards are who we have to credit for making the queen as powerful as she was. Helps that during the time period, the Queen of Spain was one of the most powerful people on the continent of Europe. So what happened was that it became the Mad Woman, or with the Mad Woman as a loose translation here, where they changed the moveset of Queen to be the moveset we're familiar with. Now, there were some minor changes. Initially, the Queen could not only move omnidirectionally, but also like a knight. They found that this was a tad too powerful, so it was brought back to just the omnidirectional. But, courtesy of the Spaniards, we now have our board looking like it does from about the 15th century to hasn't changed much aside from the piece design. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in. Next time, we're going to go into a couple of more openers, including one you might have heard of, the Queen's Gambit. Also, we'll go into some more moves that you can do in order to set up your pieces as we move towards checkmate. That'll be next time.